Morning, Glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings, all 400 affiliates across the world. I'm Hugh Hewitt on the Wednesday after the New Hampshire primary, which Bernie Sanders won with 25.9% of the vote, gaining 9 delegates. Pete Buttigieg just behind with 24.4% of the vote and 9 delegates. Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, under 20%, but just barely, 19.8% of the vote, 6 delegates. Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden, 0 delegates, both in single digits. Joining me to talk about that and many other things, Admiral James Stavridis retired in New Hampshire yesterday, Admiral.
I think that's unlikely, Hugh, but I'll very kind of you to say so.
Well, just saying that they're looking around for a moderate. I'm not sure there. And generally, the predictions are all over the map. What do you see?
First, let's do kind of the good news, so to speak. And to put it in perspective, you and I have talked of the Spanish influenza, Spanish flu 100 years ago. That ultimately infected about 40% of the world's population with here's the important number, 20% mortality rate. In other words, if 5 people caught the virus, 1 was going to die. So far, what we're seeing is very high infection rate. So this thing could continue to climb, and I think it's going to continue to climb for weeks to come, if not for the next few months. But here's the good news, Hugh, that so far the mortality rate is down around 2%, and that is good news. And partly that's because medical treatment is much, much better today than it was 100 years ago. But also the virus itself does not appear to be as lethal as a pandemic like Spanish influenza. Last point to be made here, and this is bad news. So far, it appears that you can be contagious and infect others before you have any symptoms at all. So that makes quarantine extremely difficult, and I think speaks to why you're seeing more cases popping on the cruise ship that is tied up in Yokohama, Japan. 40 more cases announced. These were people who had no symptoms when that quarantine started. So there's a long period where that virus is shedding, and that's concerning. So some good news, some bad news. Bottom line, we ought to still be very concerned about this going forward.
One more question, Admiral. You're part of the Carlyle group. You sit around and you think about big trends like our friend Stephen Schwartzman at Blackstone. I look at the market and I see them pricing it in, and the 10-year is going up, and the Hong Kong market went up almost 1% last night. It seems to me the market is discounting, except for some sectors. Travel's getting killed. Other sectors, Amazon is soaring. What are the big thoughts that you are hearing about this virus?
In addition to what you just mentioned, Hugh, the airlines, it's also tourism itself. In other words, at point where the airplanes ought to be landing on both sides of the Pacific so far, and eventually you're going to see more, activity is going to decline. For example, I was supposed to be headed to Singapore. I'm in Philadelphia today, supposed to be headed to Singapore tonight, but conference got canceled. I was supposed to do a speech in South Florida a month from now. Conference got canceled. And so that economic activity associated with airlines, flights, cruises, all of that is going to take a hit. But I agree with you. The market's pricing it in. I think people are generally thinking this may take a 0.5% off global GDP, and that's really a reflection of the size of China. And I'll close with this. In China, that's where you're going to see big economic impact, because I think they're going to have to keep the place essentially shut down for the next couple of months.
Now, Admiral, I'm going to spend most of my morning talking about the New Hampshire primary, but I've got Acting Secretary of the Navy Modly coming on, and I want to talk to him about the DoD budget, of which there are 3, I think, salient takeaways. $18 billion for the Space Force, including new satellite spacecraft and the stand-up cost. We've got ourselves $29 billion for nuclear weapons. That's an 18% increase. It's supposed to go to the Columbia sub, the B-21 and other ballistic missiles. And then we do not have a plan for 355. What's your reaction to the DoD draft budget, which is, of course, the president's budget, but it really is the Pentagon's budget. You know, the OMB messes around a little bit, but it's the DoD budget.
Yeah, it's 100% the DoD budget at the end of the day. I'll give you one takeaway, and you've nailed it, is I don't see the path to 355. I'm very curious what my good friend, and I have a lot of admiration for Acting Secretary of the Navy, Tom Modly. Very smart, Naval Academy graduate, comes out of the Navy itself, and then long career doing very high-level defense work. And I think has done a great job as Undersecretary of the Navy and as our Acting Secretary. And he has spoken to this, and also, encouragingly, the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, West Point graduate, Army guy, Hugh. So, we got to watch him. But seriously, he has also spoken to 355. What I would be asking Tom Modly this morning is, what's your mix of manned and unmanned as you get to 355? And that's where I think the fourth takeaway is here in the budget. I think there could be more emphasis on unmanned in the budget than I'm seeing. I think more emphasis on cyber and offensive cyber tools, although that's highly classified, so you're not going to see every bit of that. And I'd like to see more emphasis on special forces, but here I mean not just SEALs and Green Berets, but if you will, elite forces. I'm a supporter of the Space Force, but I'm asking the question, where is the cyber force? I think that's what we really need in addition to that Space Force. So it's a good, solid budget. I don't think it goes far enough in things like cyber, elite forces, and above all in unmanned moving forward.
Now, you've been at the very top of the Pentagon when they put the documents forward. Yep. They go over to OMB. OMB pushes some numbers around. To what extent is the president involved in this, and to what extent does the Department of Defense count on its friends on the Hill to push the numbers higher?
The president is not deeply involved in this particular budget. And frankly, if you look at all of our presidents in modern times, few of them have been deeply involved in defense budgets. The most deeply involved, I would say, was President Bush, 43, the second President Bush, because he was a war president. We were in major conflict in Iraq and then Afghanistan. He had 300,000 troops forward deployed in those two places. Today, Iraq and Afghanistan combined, we have less than 15,000 troops. So President Bush was deeply involved in the defense budget in ways that I think President Trump is not, because he's got a very full, shall we say, domestic agenda, and that's fine. He's working on the economy, I think he would say. So at the end of the day, you don't see a lot of heavy activity. Now, one thing that President Trump has been consistent about, and I think you'll hear this from Acting Secretary Modly, is on 355. That's been a pretty solid refrain from the White House, and that's why you have to look for exactly what is the path to get there. So not a huge amount of involvement at this point. That's why Acting Secretary Modly, Secretary Esper, those are the folks that are driving this. Last point, on the Hill, yes, the Navy is looking for help up there, for example. All the services are. And that's fine. That's how the system works. That's where the executive branch proposes, the legislative branch disposes. They come up with the final decisions, and that's okay. That's what democracy is all about. So, yes, it goes to the Hill now. There'll be changes up there.
And do you expect the NATO 2% mark? I had Ambassador Grinnell on yesterday talking about the fact that the Germans are looking at 2030 now. Do you expect NATO to step up as we pull back on defense spending in Europe and far-flung bases?
I don't think you're going to see a significant jump up by NATO, but I think you will continue to see our allies, not just NATO, certainly NATO in Europe, but over in the Pacific, you'll see Japan, South Korea, Australia. In the Middle East, you'll see the Saudis, the Israelis. You'll see our allies have to put more assets in defense, but I think it'll be regionally focused. No one else has the kind of global need for defense activity that we do. See paragraph 1 on why we need a 355 ship Navy, why we need a capable global Air Force, why our Army has to be able to deploy. We have needs in that direction. Ask Secretary Modly about it.
Admiral James Stavridis, always a pleasure. Thank you, Admiral, coming back with your phone calls at 1-800-520-1234. Democrats get an A and three Bs. Amy Klobuchar, Bernie, Buttigieg, and Bloomberg. Joe Biden is down, and he hasn't said he's out yet, but he is. Elizabeth Warren also done. Bennett officially gone. Wang gone. What about you? Call me. This is what you hear Joe Biden humming this morning. Hi, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Joe Biden, a distant fifth in New Hampshire. That campaign is done. My number is 1-800-520-1234. What did Slow Joe have to say last night? Cut number 6. He's talking about where he's going after 2 shattering defeats in Iowa and New Hampshire. Joe Biden, cut number 6.
Thank you. Are you headed to Nevada tomorrow?
I'm heading to South Carolina tomorrow and then going to Nevada. I don't know the exact time we're heading to Nevada. Okay, anybody else?
So are you going to South Carolina tonight?
Going to South Carolina tonight. And I'm going to be talking to my folks up here tonight as well.
I'm retreating. He's sort of like, well, he's just retreating. Cut number 7, Joe Biden getting upset with a reporter.
This is it. I'm not concerned about it at all.
Does it seem like you're giving up on New Hampshire?
I'm not giving up on New Hampshire. Don't poke that in my face, okay, buddy? That's all right. Good.
Don't poke that in my face, buddy. Got it? South Carolina. Joe says it's important that Iowa and New Hampshire have spoken. Oops, that's not what he says. Cut 20.
So many people here for me to say thank you. So I just spoke to our folks up in New Hampshire, and they did a good job. But I want to tell you, the people of Nevada are watching, and I want to make it clear we praise their diversity as a state, and I'm going to be out there seeing them very soon. Tonight, though, we just heard from the first 2 of 50 states. 2 of them. Not all the nation, not half the nation, not a quarter of the nation, not 10%, 2. Now, where I come from, that's the opening bell, not the closing bell. And the fight to end Donald Trump's presidency is just beginning. Thank you. It is important that Iowa and Nevada have spoken, but look, we need to hear from Nevada and South Carolina and Super Tuesday.
All right,
states.
so Joe, Iowa and Nevada haven't spoken, but that's okay. When you're 80, that's what you do. Joe then talks about it's not over, man. Cut 21.
I want you all to think of a number. 99.9%. That's the percentage of African American voters who have not yet had a chance to vote in America. One more number. 99.8. That's the percent of Latino voters who haven't had a chance to vote. So when you hear all these pundits and experts, cable TV talkers talked about the race, tell them, it ain't over, man. We're just getting started.
It is over, Joe. It is over, Joe. Cut number 23, David Axelrod on CNN sums it up.
You know, there were 2 national polls in the last couple of days that showed him dropping significantly. And what was noteworthy, at least in the Quinnipiac poll, I haven't been able to look inside the Monmouth poll yet, was a precipitous drop among African Americans after Iowa. Well, he had 51 or 2% before Iowa, and it was down to like 25, 26%. So it dropped by half, which goes to what you guys are saying. African American voters are discerning voters. They're looking for a candidate who can beat Donald Trump. They were attracted to Joe Biden, yes, because of his service with Barack Obama, but also because they thought he was the guy who could beat Trump. Right. And it's hard to look like a winner when you're losing.
Right.
It's hard to look like a winner when you're losing. 1-800-520-1234. What do you think of the A and 3 Bs? Amy, Bernie, Buttigieg, and Bloomberg. They're the only 4 viable candidates left. It's going to be one of those 4 or Donald Trump. Who do you want? I already voted for Bernie Sanders. I think every Republican should vote for Bernie Sanders. Open primaries are the law. It's your right to vote in them, and I think you should vote for them. You know, I began my taxes yesterday, and I'm in pretty good shape. I got all the paperwork that I need, but some of you are not in good shape. You haven't filed taxes in years, or you owe the IRS money. What should you do instead of just get everything organized? You ought to call Perry Cronin, my friend, at Axiom Tax Resolution. You ought to call him right now. 844-8-TAXPRO. Tell whoever answers it's Joe Bag of Donuts, and Hugh Hewitt told me to call Perry. Perry will talk to you personally. 844-8-TAX-PRO. Or go online to Axe Tax Help. 844-8-TAX Pro. There are as many different kinds of tax problems as there are taxpayers. Some of you owe tens of thousands. Other of you just haven't filed. Other of you you're just too complicated. 844-8-TAX-PRO or axetaxhelp.com. But when you get a hold of someone, Tell him Hugh Hewitt sent you and you want to talk to Perry Cronin. Tell him that. 844-8-TAX-PRO. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. Joe Biden thinks this song's about South Carolina. It's not, but that's okay for Joe. Joe in 5th place in New Hampshire. Who'd have thunk it? For a year, we've been told he's the front runner, and he's in 5th place, and not a very good 5th place. 8.7% of the vote. Behind Elizabeth Warren, who also flopped at 9.3% of the vote. Amy Klobuchar got 19.9% of the vote. But the winners are Buttigieg and Sanders. They're the two front runners. They both won in Iowa. They both won in New Hampshire. And now we see a Bloomberg can upset the apple cart. Look, the mainstream media is trying to make Amy Klobuchar a national candidate. I mean, they're really trying. She could not win in Iowa, and it's next door to her home state of Minnesota. I think she's a great vice presidential pick, but what do you think? Let's go down to Florida, to Orlando. Not my new affiliate. No one is called from WPNN FM 103.7, 790 AM, Pensacola's #1 information and sports leader. And you WPNN people, I know you're the cradle of naval aviation. I know you got the best beaches, so you're always welcome to call 1-800-520-1234. But we start with Dick in Orlando. Good morning, Dick. What do you think?
Hey, Hugh. Let me talk real quickly. The first thing about Joe Biden. He's really deluded here in Florida. We're seeing a ton of advertising where Barack Obama is supporting that crazy ex-governor of New York, and Biden can't even get Obama to call him back. And Biden's building his whole campaign around being Obama's vice president. So that's a non-starter.
He tried. It did not work. It isn't going to work.
Yeah, that's right. The second thing is to talk about New Hampshire itself. That's probably one of the most polarized states in the whole country. And if no one in the Democrat team can get any kind of real lead, they can't even get a third of the vote. The top three, I mean, it seems that the Democrats are in such disarray, they have no idea.
They are a mess, and I'm not unhappy, but you get to vote in Florida. I voted for Bernie Sanders in Virginia. Who are you voting for?
Well, it's a closed state here, and I'm a Republican.
Okay, it's a closed state. You don't have a choice. It's only legal where it's open. Where it is open, I think people ought to take advantage of it, just like Democrats do to ours. And I want a clear choice between the socialist and the free enterprise candidate. A choice, not an echo. Vote for Bernie. Thank you, my friend. Mike Bloomberg ran into trouble yesterday. Here's his Aspen Institute 2015 interview, cut #1 that got Mike Bloomberg into such trouble yesterday.
95% of your murderers and murder victims fit in one MO. You can just take the description, Xerox it, and pass it out to all the cops. They are male minorities, 15 to 21. That's true in New York. It's true in virtually every city. And that's where the real crime is. You've got to get the guns out of the hands of the people that get killed. So you want to spend the money for a lot of cops in the street, put those cops where the crime is, which means in the minority neighborhoods. So it's one of the unintended consequences is people say, oh my God, you are arresting kids for marijuana that are all minorities. Yes, that's true. Why? Because we put all the cops in the minority neighborhoods. Yes, that's true. Why we do it? Because that's where all the crime is. And the way you get
we put all the cops in minority neighborhoods because that's where all the crime is. Mike Bloomberg is going to do really well with the African-American vote against Donald Trump. Mike Bloomberg gave a different interview a couple of years earlier to WOR about, we're stopping white people too much. Cut #2.
They just keep saying, it's a disproportionate percentage of a particular ethnic group. That may be, but it's not a disproportionate percentage of those who witnesses and victims describe as committing the murder. In that case, incidentally, I think we disproportionately stop whites too much and minorities too little.
Okay, that's going to go over really well as well. Mike Bloomberg is going to try and buy a lot, but people are going to hear that WR interview. We're going to put that on the Joe Biden is flat on his back. Mike Bloomberg is going there. Amy Klobuchar has got all the charisma of a Minnesota hot dish. I'm telling you right now, even if she escapes the nickname Angry Amy from the early campaign Oppo research on her being abusive to her staff, even if she isn't Angry Amy, and I don't know that she will escape that, she's got no charisma. and great vice presidential choice in the line of Tim Kaine. But it's going to be Bernie or Pete or Bloomberg. One of those three. We'll see. AOC was out leading the squad for the Bernie, New Hampshire rally yesterday. Cut number 3.
We are at a crossroads in our democracy. We're at a key crossroads. And we cannot underestimate the power of hate. We cannot underestimate the power of that divisiveness and the centering and the vitriol and all of that. We cannot underestimate that. And that is why we need to nominate someone with a political revolution at their back, with decades of organizing bringing us to this moment. It is not going to be any one candidate that defeats Donald Trump. It's going to be a movement of Americans that defeat Donald Trump in rejection of hatred and embracing
Okay, I got
of
to ask you a
love.
question. How many of you go out the front door in the day and you're driving down and you think you see hatred all around you? How many of you people just feel hatred everywhere? You know, I went to Mass on Saturday. I went to church on the Presbyterian Church on Sunday. That's my practice. Been around a lot of people this week. People I disagree with, people I agree with, family, non-family. Go out, give talks on the radio. How many of you hear hatred and feel hatred in this country? What is she talking about? But the Bernie boomlet continues. Up in Minnesota, Bruce, Minnesota cold up there. How are you, Bruce?
Hey, I'm great. It's going to get a lot colder tonight, but it's okay right now.
And how about Amy Klobuchar? Your senator came in third, and she thinks it's a win. That's how things are in Minnesota.
Well, just want to let you know, a lot of us Minnesotans know Amy a little better. She's got a terrible mean streak. That little Minnesota nice smile she does behind the scenes, she can be a snake in the grass.
Well, I think Angry Amy is going to be the name the president gives her. We'll see.
Yeah, well, that's the truth. You saw her during the Kavanaugh hearings and whatever. You got to watch out for her. She's not what she appears. She's not the Minnesota nice that we're known for.
Do you have an open primary in Minnesota?
No.
Too bad you can't vote for Bernie. Thank you, my friend. Let's go to Kurt, also in Minnesota cold. Hello, Kurt.
Hey, Hugh, how are you doing?
Good.
Hey, I don't mean to sound mean, but whatever the definition of a dog-faced pony soldier is...
Stop right there. Not going to do it. Wouldn't be prudent. Don't want to hear what you want to say about that. Tony in Greenville. How are you, Tony, down in South Carolina? It's an open primary. You going to vote for Bernie?
I don't know. I can't make up my mind.
Vote for Bernie.
Well, I was going to do that, but now that Biden's struggling so hard, I think it would mix the things up to vote for Biden. So.
No. Go with your original instinct. We want a clear choice on the ballot in 2020. Socialism is a fever that's got to be broken. The AOC phenomenon's got to be broken. It's just got to be broken. Right now, the President of the United States has tweeted, right? Did someone tell me? The President of the United States has tweeted? Fake news, CNN and MSDNC, good joke by the president, have not surprisingly refused to talk about my record-setting number of voters in New Hampshire and in Iowa. That's why they are poorly rated fake news. I will win both states in November, he says. And, he probably will. Time for me to remind you about what's going on in the markets. The market story of the day brought to you, of course, by our friends at Birch Gold Group. Global concerns about the coronavirus are getting more, not less pressing. And it's no wonder that a lot of the wealthiest people in the world diversified a long time ago, and some people are diversifying now, and they're putting a portion of their IRA and their retirement savings into precious metals. You have to be willing to take action if you want to be like them. And my friends at Birch Gold Group make it so easy to convert an eligible IRA or 401k into a precious metals IRA and give you security. Security no matter what lies ahead. All you have to do is text Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747 to request a free information kit. See if diversification is right for your family. I think it is. For just this month, because February has 29 days this year, you get an extra day. It's a bonus day. They're giving you a bonus offer with every $5,000 you move into an IRA backed by physical precious metals. They'll give you a free 1-ounce silver coin. You move $25,000, they'll give you 5 of them. 5 1-ounce coins. Just a little teaser. Come on in, give it a look. But you have to text them and buy this month. You don't get it for asking for the information. You get it for actually opening the physical metals IRA. Birch Gold Group has thousands of satisfied customers, countless 5-star reviews, an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau. Text Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. Get your free info kit. Claim your eligibility for this offer today. Text Hugh to 474747. Overnight, everything turned green abroad. Japan up 0.75%. Hong Kong up almost 1%. England up 0.5%. Germany up more than 0.75%. Amazon was up $17 yesterday. It's going to have another great day today because Amazon's the big winner, and I own Amazon, so I'm self-interested, but I'm happy to see this. Coronavirus has got everybody spooked. They're running around Great Britain looking for 12 patients who were treated by 2 British GPs who've been diagnosed with the coronavirus. In other news, it could be, quote, several months before the end of the coronavirus epidemic, according to the chair of the Royal College of General Practitioners. An additional 39 people on board the Diamond Princess cruise ship off the Japanese coast have tested positive. China reported a drop in new cases, but the total dead from the disease, 1,100. There are more than 45,000 people infected with the virus in China. The World Health Organization went with a new PC name, COVID-19. That's not going to work. Just call it coronavirus. Wuhan coronavirus, whatever. They're afraid of stigma. I'm afraid of people dying. About 300 employees have been evacuated from Singapore's biggest bank, DBS, after one person fell ill there. And 2 prisoners at Bullingdon, Oxfordshire, are being tested for the virus. It's a wild thing that's doing to markets what wild things do to market. They price it in, then they rebound. Looks like a rebound overnight in Asia as people realize the mortality is not that high. Again, the biggest story of the day, Bernie won, and balloting is underway in California, where I think he's going to win as well. I don't think Amy Klobuchar is going to get the time of day in California. But I want to give you the time of day of ReliefFactor.com. Time to get it out. Be ready for a long day. Take that, ReliefFactor.com. Icarian, Curcumin, Resveratrol, Omega. All 4 pro. Down they go, and all of a sudden you've got yourself all the natural supplements you need. Perfect amount, scientifically calibrated, scientifically designed by our friends at ReliefFactor.com. They also make the Honorbound coffee that I'm drinking, HonorboundCoffee.com. Go and get your 2 bags for the cost of 1 offer today at HonorboundCoffee.com. 4 different brews, 4 different grinds, 1 great cause. Military families, 100% of the profits go there. But start with ReliefFactor.com because that helps you. And if you're feeling good, you'll help other people feel good. If you're in the game, you're exercising, you're free of the aches and pains that go with a long commute, which ReliefFactor.com will provide support for the temporary relief of those minor aches and pains. Then you'll feel good about yourself. Then you'll go sign up for HonorboundCoffee.com. Start with ReliefFactor.com and come right back after the break. 1-800-520-1234. More of your calls coming up. The Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Coming up after the break, Acting Secretary of the Navy Thomas Modly joins me. Do not go anywhere. Ben Sasse, Senator Extraordinaire, coming along. Ruth Marcus, James Hohmann of the Washington Post. A lot ahead. Look, I always thought that the Democrats would not get to a second round of voting. They have proportional representation. And so I figured that two of them would have 50% plus one of the delegates, and they'd do a deal. Bernie, Buttigieg, Bernie, they would do a deal. Now, though, they may end up with four candidates, neither two of whom have 50%, in which case you can't work a deal, in which case the superdelegates come in Bigfoot Bernie. That would split the Democratic Party. If Bernie wins the most delegates, Bernie better be the nominee. And I am here to tell you, if it's an open primary in your state and you're allowed to vote for Bernie, do not listen to these Democrats telling you you don't have the right to vote. That's utter nonsense. I would prefer a closed primary system everywhere. I've been for a closed primary system wherever I've been asked to comment on it. But if they have not changed the law of your state and it's an open primary, you take that ballot and you vote for whomever you want. That's the law. It's legal and it's moral to try and influence the choice that you want before the American people. I want the choice to be between pure socialism, Bernie, and pure free market economics, Trump. That's what I want. So I voted for Bernie. It's a moral choice. It's a politically important choice. It's a legal choice. It's a choice you ought to make. I also want you to make the choice to go see the movie Created Equal about Clarence Thomas. It's Clarence Thomas in his own words. It's a terrific film. It's an important film made by Michael Pack, who's a terrific director. Clarence Thomas has lived one of those lives that you actually have to read about or see a movie about to fully appreciate the drama that he has lived. My Grandfather's Son, I Am My Grandfather's Son, is his memoir from many years ago. He joined me on air to talk about it for, I think, 3 hours. It was so riveting. And I've known the Justice since 1984 when we worked together on the combined federal campaign in the Washington, D.C. metro area. But he's gone on to become a hero to so many millions of people, rightly so. And he endured the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. He'd come out smiling and laughing on the other side. JusticeThomasMovie.com is where you'll find the theater that Created Equal is playing in. JusticeThomasMovie.com. To the phones, Ralph in Cleveland, Ohio. Hello, Ralph. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. What say you, Ralph?
Well, my saying is I think Biden's getting ready for the final stage of his defense against Durham and Barr. He's getting fitted for his Vincent the Chin Gigante robe.
You know, I don't think Biden was in on it. I don't think Clueless Joe was allowed in any of the rooms where it happened. And that's why he's not worried. Clueless Joe, Jackson, Biden is just not part of the McCabe-Comey gang. Thank you, my friend. Brian, Louisville, Kentucky. Hey, Brian, good morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
Great.
I'm a Democrat. Actually, I'm not a left liberal or none of that. But I just think you're underestimating. You and Dennis Prager are two of the smartest people I've listened to on the radio. But I can't believe that you all didn't learn a lesson from Trump. We were dying to get Trump in there because we thought he would be so easy to beat, and we underestimated the voters out here who would just turn out. We thought Bernie got cheated last time. Everybody's just going to turn out in droves. I just can't believe, and I've heard other talk show hosts on the Salem Network say that they don't agree with you trying to get Bernie in there because they think you're underestimating.
But I don't think Bernie's the weakest candidate. I told people on Meet the Press when I originally said I was voting for Bernie and did vote for Bernie, Elizabeth Warren was the weakest candidate. If I had been a strategic voter, I would have voted for Elizabeth Warren, but I'm not a strategic voter. I'm a clarity voter. As Dennis likes to say, he stole this from me, clarity before agreement. I want the country to confront the choice that is driving the division in the country, the AOC and the Squad division. We've got to confront and defeat socialism. The only way you do that is to put a socialist on the ballot, let him campaign as a full-throated socialist, and let America choose. Because one of two things will happen. He will be defeated soundly, and we can put that socialism temptation to bed for a generation, or he'll win, and after 4 years, he'll be crushed. Because it doesn't work. It destroys economies and lives. So you can't lose with Bernie on the ticket. That's why I'm for Bernie. Thank you, Brian. Let's go to Ohio again. Joe in northeastern Ohio. He's in the land. Hello, Joe.
Good morning, Mr. Hewitt. How are you today?
I'm terrific.
outstanding. I want to echo what you're saying, and I think that Elizabeth Warren needs to step down so that the socialist wing of the Democratic Party can coalesce around Bernie Sanders, and I will be voting for Mr. Sanders in the primary, but not the general.
You and me both. I already did. My vote's signed, sealed, and delivered, and I want everyone listening in South Carolina to realize that's an open primary, and they ought to go and vote for clarity on the ballot. Absolutely. And Ohio doesn't vote till March 17th, so do not be dissuaded in between. You might go vote early.
Sir.
Go vote early. Thank you, Joe. Let me talk to Jeff in Minnesota. Jeff, you got 30 seconds. Go ahead, buddy.
Hey, Minnesota is an open primary state. In the midterms, I just walked up, asked for the Democrat ballot, voted for the worst candidate. It didn't work, but on March 3rd, I'm going to vote for Bernie in Minnesota.
Go for Bernie and not for Amy. Go Bernie. Feel the burn, America. Feel the burn. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm coming right back. 1-800-520-1234. I start with Acting Secretary of the Navy Thomas Modly. Mike Gallagher will be along from Wisconsin. Senator Ben Sasse from the state without football, Nebraska. Lots ahead. Don't go anywhere. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, candidates. Hugh Hewitt on the day after the New Hampshire primary, which Bernie Sanders won. Joe Biden decisively lost. Elizabeth Warren also on the canvas, doesn't appear to be able to get up off of it. The new star of the punditocracy, the talking heads, Amy Klobuchar, didn't even get 20%. Pete Buttigieg in second place. More of that coming up, but I begin the hour with Acting Secretary of the Navy, Thomas Modly. Mr. Secretary, welcome back. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Good morning, Hugh. How are you?
I am great. Now, I got a little primer from Admiral Stavridis, who your ears must have been burning. He said all these great things about you last hour. And I'm going to get to his question list, but only after I ask my first. I've been very concerned about the coronavirus, covering it extensively. In 1918, the Navy did more to spread the killer Spanish flu, which was actually from Kansas, than any other organization in the world. There were floating coffins as they shipped troops to Europe. What is the Navy doing to prevent this virus from moving through its ranks this century?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. I was actually looking through John Barry's book on the great influenza of 1918 this weekend, and getting an understanding of how difficult and how challenging these situations are. We are helping. We are assisting with all the federal authorities that are involved in the housing of people that are coming back from China to the United States. We've got about 300 of them out at Miramar in housing units there, and they're under quarantine now for 14 days, and we're ensuring that they're getting tested to make sure that the virus is not there and not spreading. We did have one person that tested positive. That person's now in the hospital, but so far no one else in that group has been found to be positive. And the interesting thing with these viruses is they tend to lay dormant for a while, and you have to really monitor them over an extended period of time to ensure that they don't mutate and come in. I'm sure you've read about that 1918. That sort of came in two waves. You had this initial wave, and then you had a much more virulent wave that came later. So we're doing. I mean, we certainly have the systems in place. Obviously, much more now than we did, over 100 years ago to manage this. And I think the key with all this is getting good information out to the public, but also, where the source of the virus. If we don't have good transparency into that, it makes it difficult to manage it. And I think that's one of our concerns right now, is that we don't feel like we're getting good, solid information out of China, but hopefully that will improve.
Secretary Modly, to belabor it, in 1918, the Navy thought they were doing a good thing by quarantining troops on the troop transports, but in fact they ate in the same mess hall. Viruses hang around on tables, utensils, doorknobs, and you can't quarantine. Do you see a vector coming out? These vectors that the Secretary sends out are very good reading. I recommend them to everyone, on what happens if a virus shows up on a ship, because they've got to immediately lock it down.
That's we're monitoring this to see whether or not that's it's going to be necessary for me to communicate on it. I mean, across the whole Navy, we're doing a pretty good job, I think, of communicating to the folks about what we need to do in this situation. But I would also say, Hugh, that it is 100 years later. We understand these viruses much more than we did back then. And I think we have the much greater mass communication ability to get messages out to people. And so I think that as long as we maintain our intention and focus on this, we're going to be fine.
All right, well, let's turn to the Defense Department budget, which was released this week. I'm not a fan, but I understand it's not your budget. It's not Secretary Esper's budget. It's a budget from people who came before you. I know OMB tweaked it a little bit, but I still don't see a path to 355. That's the number of ships that President Trump campaigned on. And President Trump said repeatedly we would get there. I don't even see a plan yet. And Admiral Stavridis said, I wonder what the mix of manned, unmanned is going to be in getting to 355. So why are we not even with a plan yet, Secretary Modly?
Well, we are developing a plan right now. And I think the last time I was on your show, I mentioned that the 21 budget was pretty close to being baked. And we were going through our integrated naval force structure assessment at the time, and that the output of that particular force structure assessment was going to inform the 22 and beyond budget. And I've put the marker out there for the department that we want to get to 355 within 10 years. And so we are developing a plan to do that. Now, we are facing several significant pieces of pressure on that. One is we're still in a fairly large sustainment hole that was created in the past, and we're trying to dig our way out of, and we're putting a lot more money because it's nice to have the ships, but they have to work too. So we're putting money into that piece of it. And we also have top-line pressure because of the 40-year recapitalization of our nuclear deterrent force, which is a bill that only comes due every 40 years. And unfortunately, we've not been given additional top line to manage that recapitalization. So all the money that has to go to build the Columbia-class submarine, which we're funding now for the first one in this budget, it comes straight out of our shipbuilding line. And as that program progresses, it's going to eat up more and more and more of our shipbuilding line. So I think this year it's about 25%, and it's going to escalate up to 31% based on the plans we have now. So my job is to basically lay these facts out for the Secretary of Defense and for the President, and they're going to have to make a call here. We are also going to do what we can within the Department of the Navy to look at old programs that we can shed that don't have relevance to where we see the future force structure headed. And we're going to do that. We're starting a stem-to-stern review to look at everything to get rid of things that we don't think are relevant for the future. And as you may know, these budget processes here are very, very arcane, and they take a long time. And sometimes by the time they get up to my level, there are decisions made at lower levels to sustain programs that I don't even have visibility into. So we're not going to do that this time. We're going to look at everything to determine how we can free up capital to fund this plan to get there in 10 years. But I would say that regardless of what we're able to find, we're going to have to address the top-line challenge that we have.
This will be a question for Senator Sasse later, Senator Inhofe, the chairman of the Senate Defense, when he comes on. Mike Gallagher, if they plus up the DoD budget and they say to the Navy, here's your money for your top-line nuke resupply, build some ships, what will you build? Will you build the new frigate? Will you advance the selection process of that? Back to the Stavridis question, how many manned and how many unmanned?
So here's the way I've looked at this all along. I've always considered this a 355 plus plan, where the plus would be unmanned vessels that we are still experimenting with. The plan that we've developed has unmanned in them, but there's still the traditional definition of a battle force ship is what makes up the 355 in my calculation. As we look at what we've determined in this first INSFA, our Integrated Naval Force Structure Assessment, the number is closer to 400, to be honest with you, and that's with the addition of some new amphibious ships that are smaller and lighter and more agile, that support the Commandant's expeditionary amphibious base operations, and some new supply ships that are currently in the mix. So the levers we have are to start building those faster, accelerate the FFGX, and we're going to be awarding the FFGX this year. And I would like to start looking at how we accelerate the procurement of that. Right now we have one this year, one next year, and then two the year after that, continuing on. And so obviously we want to look at, can we get to 3 a year? Can we get to 4 a year? And all those things are going to work into the mix that we have. But as I said, in any case, it's going to be bumping up against some serious top-line pressure. And that's my job to try and sell that to both the President and the Secretary of Defense.
If you get to 3 or 4 FFGXs, that will be a big win in my view. 2 quick exits, Mr. Secretary. The number of anti-ship missiles went, according to David Larder, from 88 in 2016 to 850 in this year's budget. That's a big deal. I think that's great. And then Admiral Stavridis says, where's the cyber force? So is 850 the floor? What's the ceiling? And where's the cyber force appropriation?
Well, you mean, are you talking about the Navy cyber force or across the entire?
Across the entire, but obviously you'll know the Navy better than anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still heavily investing in cyber. I mean, it's also we're also heavily investing in our entire information management domain here in the Department of the Navy for sure. So, and as far as the floor is concerned, I think the way that they've on the missiles, I don't think that's the floor at all. I think we're going to continue to look at how we not only increase the number of existing missiles we have in the inventory, but really start investing heavily in the hypersonic space, both with air breathers as well as ballistic hypersonic weapons. We are outgunned in that right now, and we really need to accelerate that, and you'll see that in the budget as well.
Acting Secretary Modly, keep coming back. I look forward to watching those hearings and to seeing that just real quickly, when will we see the plan for 2021 to get to 355 plus?
I am working that right now. I'm supposed to be briefing that to the Secretary of Defense in the next week, and it's sort of up to him after that.
Okay, I hope it's sooner rather than later. Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining me. Coming right back, America. Don't go anywhere. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show. We are sliding away from serious numbers about the coronavirus. I just do not know whether or not to believe anything that comes out of China. Good morning. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Bernie Sanders won the New Hampshire primary. Pete Buttigieg was in second, a distant third. Amy Klobuchar and completely down on the floor, off the chart. Elizabeth Warren in fourth place. And believe it or not, Joe Biden, the Mr. I Can Win It All, can't get into fifth place, can't get to double digits in New Hampshire. He's on to South Carolina to lose there, too. And meanwhile, we look at the economic story of the day, brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. Andrew Del Rey, Todd Avakian. AndrewandTodd.com are lenders with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. You can also call them at 888-888-1172. It is a terrific time to be borrowing money from your house to consolidate debt. Yesterday, the 10-year went down as far as 1.55%. It's up a little bit this morning and will remain up a little bit today as I see markets around the world stabilizing. Japan up 0.75% overnight. Hong Kong up 8.87%. England and Germany both advancing this morning. I expect another good day on the U.S. market. Yesterday, my proxy for the tech sector, Amazon, was up $17. It's going to be up again today. The tech sector in the United States is rising. I'm glad I don't own any airline stocks. I only own one stock, actually, Amazon. But, I don't know I have no idea what the mix is in my mutual funds. I'm not an investor. Do not stay at Holiday Inns. Don't know, other than Amazon, which I know is going to take over the world. But I do know that it's a great time, if you own a house, to take money out and get rid of debt. Better to get the debt at 3.5%, 3.75%. Find out what the rate is by calling Todd and Andrew at 888-888-1172. Better yet, go online to AndrewandTodd.com, AndrewandTodd.com. Answer a couple of questions. They will tell you the story. What's the story of the day economically? Coronavirus. According to the South China Morning Post, China says there are 45,175 cases, 1,115 deaths, 4,774 recovered. The number of deaths outside of China is really one, I believe. Just a total of one. But people are on the alert. People are worried. And as you just heard Acting Secretary Modly say in 1918, the Spanish flu virus, which was misnamed, it should have been the Kansas flu virus. It began in Kansas, according to the best epidemiology, went round the world once, exploded in April, went into hibernation, came back in October and September and exploded into a killing virus. That's what you've got to worry about. That's why all of American medicine and worldwide medicine working around the clock to find the antiviral that kills this particular virus. That's why markets are studying. They think they're going to do that. But while markets steady, rates are low. AndrewandTodd.com, AndrewandTodd.com. Also, don't forget, 1-800-520-1234. I want to hear what you think about the New Hampshire primary. Don't forget Created Equal by Clarence Thomas. It's about the justice who put up with more than even Justice Kavanaugh did. Clarence Thomas is a hero. His great autobiography, My Grandfather's Son, always inspired me. I've known Clarence forever. Justice Thomas, I don't call him Clarence anymore. I don't call the Chief Justice anything other than the Chief Justice. When they ascend to the nine, you got to change the way you call them. But I'll tell you right now, go see Created Equal, Clarence Thomas's own words. Find out where it's playing by going to justicethomasmovie.com. Also want to alert you, Hillsdale College has a new online course, which I'll be talking about with Larry Arnn on Friday, Land of Hope, an invitation to the great American story. It's taught by Wilfred McClay. He's a professor at the University of Oklahoma. If you're tired of bad history, stupid PC history, go watch Professor McClay's New American History video course. Get his New American History textbook. It's all at hillsdale.edu. Hillsdale.edu. Tim Ryan tells us what will happen if Bernie is the nominee. He says we'll lose 48 states. I think Tim Ryan is just trying to reinflate Joe Biden's deflated campaign. I like Tim. We're friends, but he's wrong. He's absolutely wrong. Bernie will not lose 48 states. Stay tuned, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. All my Buff fans out there, the Buffaloes lost their head coach Mel Tucker to Michigan State overnight. They're as bummed out as Wisconsin fans who can't ever seem to win anything. I'm joined by Representative Mike Gallagher of the great state of Wisconsin that can't ever seem to win anything. He, however, is on the Armed Services Committee of the House of Representatives. We got to talk about this DOD budget. But Congressman Gallagher, can we begin by getting your reaction to the New Hampshire results last night?
Well, first of all, Hugh, your preemptive strikes on Wisconsin, your lies, you lying dog-faced pony soldier. You coined a phrase. Well, Hugh, this aggression will not stand. Well, listen, Hugh, I have
a lying dog-faced pony soldier.
That's a great cut. I have enough experience with presidential primaries to be wary of making any predictions, but it's clear we have to take the possibility of Trump versus Bernie Sanders in the general election seriously. I think it's fair to say that Bernie is the front runner, and while I'm confident that President Trump would defeat Sanders in a head-to-head, it's troubling that a socialist like Sanders would take over the Democratic Party. And I think there are many factors driving Sanders' popularity on the left, and one of those is the transformation of Congress and the political parties into platforms for performance rather than professionalism or legislating. And Sanders was really an early adopter of the grandstanding style that is now popular in Congress. He's given countless impassioned floor speeches to an empty chamber, spreading an unrealistic far-left message that could only succeed in the kind of always-on media environment we live in today, and appealing to a small but vocal minority of voters. And I think it's sad that a candidate like him can persist for so long, harping on an outdated message. And I hope his popularity in these primary contests is short-lived, because I don't want to see a socialist on a presidential ticket under any circumstances. But if he succeeds in winning the nomination, I'm confident President Trump will win another.
Boy, do we disagree. I already voted for Bernie in the open Virginia primary because I have excused absentee. And I did that because I do want socialism on the ballot, because I do want to repudiate it. My theory, Mike Gallagher, is either beat it up front right now, or if he wins in 4 years, it will be such a disaster, it will be repudiated forever. But the socialists have been trying for 100 years, since Eugene Debs, to get on the ballot. Give them a time at bat and let them strike out.
Well, being from Wisconsin, I'm acquainted with the history of the socialist movement, and I understand the idea of giving the American people a stark choice like that. But be careful what you wish for. I mean, some of the trends that we're seeing, particularly among millennials, younger voters, are really troubling. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us in elected office on the Republican side of the aisle to think about how we can counter those trends, how we can have a better message, and how we can explain the evils of socialism and communism. I just cannot understate the stakes in terms of foreign policy. We have made enormous progress in the last 3 years under President Trump, with National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien now in that position, with Matt Pottinger, his deputy, in reorienting all of U.S. foreign policy to compete and win against China, in restoring credible American deterrence after 8 years of it collapsing under President Obama. And if we go backwards, if we go back to a soft on China policy, which it appears Sanders, Bloomberg, and other Democratic candidates are advocating for, that would be a tragedy, in my opinion. So the stakes are high, not only economically and ideologically in terms of free market versus socialism, but also for foreign policy and American power.
And you know, Congressman, I agree with that, but I am not afraid of the conversation. And I believe the only way to break the fever is to put it out front, isolate the virus of socialism in the person of Bernie Sanders, and let's talk about AOC and the squad. Let's talk about the craziness of my favorite economist, Milton Keynes, to quote AOC, your colleague. Honest to goodness, you must have some interesting days in the chamber. Now, in Wisconsin, I got to ask a particular question. You don't vote till April 7th. Would a Klobuchar next-door neighbor campaign have appeal there, or is the Minnesota-Wisconsin divide like the Michigan-Ohio divide?
Well, I can't see Klobuchar winning the nomination. And if she's the vice president, I doubt she'll have much impact on the ticket. I mean, we've had vice presidential nominees from Wisconsin that haven't won Wisconsin, so it's very difficult to project. I do think Wisconsin, being a purple state, being a very common-sense state, responds to more moderate or independent people. But I do think there's a weird thing going on. If you dig into the data in 2016, there were a lot of voters in Wisconsin who liked both Bernie and President Trump because they like this sort of disruptive mentality. They were so sick with the status quo that they wanted someone kind of from outside the system to shake that system up. So I'm not sure I can confidently make a prediction about what would play well in Wisconsin at this point because there is so much game left to play. But I highly doubt, given the energy on the other side of the aisle, that someone in the more moderate lane is going to win the primary unless we get to a brokered convention and on the second ballot, the superdelegates give it to someone other than Bernie. But at that point, all hell is going to break loose. I mean, that will be a very interesting moment for the Democratic Party.
It will be. Now let's turn to the DOD budget. First of all, I blasted the budget earlier this week because it doesn't get to 355. The president's had 4 budgets. Not one of them has gotten a plan to 355. I was told by people in the Pentagon, don't blame Esper, don't blame Moodley. They inherited this mess from Spencer and from the last guy in the E-ring. It's not their problem. I just keep coming back. And besides, it's the president's budget. This is the services budget. They drive the top line on this stuff, Mike Gallagher, don't they?
They do, and I think it's fair to say, as a point of criticism, that we cannot get to 355 by buying 4 fewer ships this year and cutting the shipbuilding budget. We also didn't have a 30-year shipbuilding plan submitted with this budget, which is required under law. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And as I said yesterday at the Amphibious Warfare Industrial Coalition, Congress can't want to build the fleet and modernize the fleet more than the Navy and the Marine Corps want to build and modernize the fleet. We need the Navy to be strongly making the case and telling a story to us and the American people for integrated American naval power, what we actually intend to do, particularly in Indo-PACOM, a convincing and simple story so that people like me who are already bought in to the idea that we need a bigger Navy, who are already advocates for sea power, can convince my more skeptical colleagues and also convince the American people. And so when we get a budget like this, I think it makes that more difficult. So we have a lot of work that is left to be done. I am very interested in getting the results of the Integrated Naval Force Structure Assessment. My understanding is that Secretary Esper is going to review the work that Acting Secretary Moodley and others have done on that, the Commandant and the CNO. And I hope that a clear and simple story for what the future of American sea power emerges from that process, because every year we go backwards, it makes it less likely that we're going to get to 355 and more likely that the Chinese Communist Party is going to push us out past the first island chain and further dominate Indo-PACOM.
I got to agree. And I got to tell you, when I see Richard Spencer, who I interviewed a number of times on this show and when I was doing MSNBC, former Secretary of the Navy, leave his job and endorse Mike Bloomberg. I go to the president, I say, why can't we find a cheerleader from the Navy like the president used to say he wanted to be a cheerleader for the country? What you just talked about is someone who will sell the need, not make it up, not exaggerate it, just explain it again and again and again. I think Moodley's doing a good job of that, but I don't know he's going to get the nomination to be secretary, even if the current one is withdrawn. I don't know that Esper is really interested in the Navy.
Well, I don't know about that. I should stipulate that while I probably pay more attention to the Navy and Marine Corps than most members of Congress, obviously I'm not involved in the discussions at the Pentagon. I'd love to be. I think Esper has rightly said that he wants to get Congress involved in reviewing the Integrated Naval Force Structure Assessment. I hope he does, because he's going to need to get buy-in. And I will say that I think everyone is trying to move the ball in the right direction. The Secretary's initiative on getting savings from the so-called fourth estate agencies, for example, is a great idea. He was able to dig up over $5 billion in savings that we can realign to better fit the NDS. So there are difficult decisions that will need to be made. However, foremost among them is, one, do we have to break the one-third division between the services in order to build a bigger Navy? And that would create enormous tension between the services. And second and related is the Columbia-class sub purely a Navy bill, or because it's performing a strategic nuclear deterrence function, which benefits all the services and the entire country, do we need to fund it more broadly within the Department of Defense and bring back Joe Courtney's idea of a sea-based deterrence fund in order to fund Columbia.
Isn't that
those are big
obvious? And
decisions.
not just the Columbia class, but the B-21 and the missile upgrade. Shouldn't the nuke budget be separate and apart so it doesn't impact the services? Because the deterrent is the deterrent, and you've got to have it.
That's my view. And once you do that, then you can really start to get creative for what that future fleet looks like, right? I think, to the extent I can read the tea leaves in terms of what Secretary Esper and Secretary Mobley are trying to say, there's some good stuff, right? For example, we need to expand smaller ships in the fleet. We need a minimum of 50 frigates, probably more like 55. We can also get creative, for example, in putting long-range anti-ship missiles on Mark 6 patrol boats. I would commend to you the comment on the Marine Corps' comments at the Amphibious Coalition yesterday, which we talked about the fact that hulking L-class amphibious ships do not make sense for every situation. And we can heavily invest in intermediate range missiles and have small teams of Marines dispersed throughout the first island chain with ground launch intermediate range missiles in order to complicate the Chinese Communist Party's decision-making cycle. There's a lot of ways where we can save money, get creative, and do what we need to do in Indo-PACOM, but it all starts with that direction from the top of here's what we want the future fleet to look like, and here's what it's going to cost.
Yep, that's what we need to do. Mike Gallagher, you're right again on defense, wrong as usual on sports, but it's always a pleasure to talk to him. Follow him at Rep Gallagher on Twitter. Don't follow him on sports. Follow him on Navy, Marines, and defense stuff. Follow me, please, to honorboundcoffee.com. Holding up the bag for those of you who are watching on Town Hall TV or on Universe or on HughHewitt.com. Honorbound Coffee. Hear that bag? You get 2 bags for the price of one with your first order. 100% of the profits of Honorbound Coffee support America's military families. That's because Pete and Seth Talbot, who started ReliefFactor.com, sat down with their whole team and said, okay, we're living the life. We're doing great things with our church, with our family. What do we do for military families who are bearing the burden? So they started Honorbound Coffee. And the first group that gets benefits from this, the Semper Fi Fund, you've been hearing about them for years on this program. And I will be recommending other military charities to Pete and Seth. But in the meantime, Honorbound Coffee, you know that 100% of the profits going to military families. And you should get every single drop of coffee you drink. You ought to drink with a clear conscience saying, I'm supporting the American military with this cup of Joe. HonorboundCoffee.com. How easy is that to remember? HonorboundCoffee.com. Go, make your first order, get a subscription going, never buy coffee at a supermarket again. HonorboundCoffee.com. ReliefFactor.com. It's time to remind you commuters, 7:45, 7:46 in the D.C. area. That means you got about 3 hours to get to work. In Atlanta, you're really screwed. Cleveland, not so bad. Wherever you are in the Midwest, it's time to get in the car if you haven't already gotten in the car. But before you get in the car, go get your ReliefFactor.com. It's in the cupboard. You put it there. It's in the bathroom. You put it there. You forgot it. Turn around. Go back inside. You haven't left the street yet. You're pulling out of the driveway. You're about to walk down to the bus. You're headed to the subway. Turn around. Take an extra 3 minutes. Take your ReliefFactor.com. Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. Makes you healthy and supports the temporary relief of the minor aches and pain that make that walk to the subway or those steps you have to go up or down at work a little bit easier to manage. The aches and pains that bother you go away with ReliefFactor.com in support. Give it a try. I'll be right back, America. Senator Ben Sasse joins me next on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined by United States Senator Ben Sasse. Good morning, Senator. Great to have you.
Good morning, Hugh. Thanks for having me on.
I hear you're going to the Nebraska breakfast. Are you going to promise the return of college football to Nebraska?
It's sort of an eschatological truth that people know without my promising, but it'll be there.
It's going to come someday, huh? I want to cover two things with you. You got a new bill on protecting born alive babies, and you've got concerns about coronavirus. Take them in the order you'd like to, Senator.
Well, yesterday we got to, thanks for having me on, and two really important topics. Yesterday I got to chair the Senate Judiciary Committee on my Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which is an amazingly simple piece of legislation. It says that babies are babies, and when babies survive an abortion, they should get the care they need. It's kind of self-explanatory that whether a baby's born in a hospital with a fancy state-of-the-art NICU unit, or if you're a baby born in an abortion clinic in a strip mall, if you survive an abortion, you should have a fighting chance at life. And right now, federal law doesn't criminalize killing these babies passively by denying them care. It's called the stepping away tactic. And we need to get this passed. Last year, we got a majority vote and a bipartisan vote on the Senate floor. And we have a president who's willing to sign it. But the Democrats filibustered the bill last year, so we were able. Some of them said that they would consider voting for it if only there'd been a hearing to explain it more clearly. And we're like, all right, then. Lindsey Graham and I and Mitch McConnell got together, and the Judiciary Committee yesterday was dedicated to letting people ask any and all questions they wanted.
Did any Democrats come?
Oh, yeah, but mostly to just repeat Planned Parenthood nonsense talking points that had nothing to do with our bill. So you had people giving, I don't know, maybe pushing half of the Democrats on the committee came, and they would give speeches about euphemisms about the importance of, second trimester abortion, third trimester abortion. I am happily and proudly pro-life, but this bill doesn't have anything to do with abortion. There's no restrictions on abortion anywhere in the bill. There's nothing about second trimester, third trimester. This is about babies that are already born and whether or not you have to provide care to a baby who's alive on a table, gasping for life.
They would not stand. They sat on their hands, Democrats did, when the president inveighed against late-term abortion in the State of the Union. I think that telegraphed to the country that all the Democratic Party is radical now. It's not about early abortion. It's not about first trimester or first 2 months. It's about radical autonomy for the mother.
Yeah, we've seen some really crazy language in that. I'm happy to say I've not watched 1 minute of the Democratic debates, but I've read the after reports, and you see some of the stuff that Mayor Pete has said, some of the stuff that Bernie Sanders has said, and it is just crazy to be in the grips of the abortion industry like that, where you can't even talk about the facts that are before you. And I think it's pretty significant that 82% of the American people oppose removing medical care from viable babies after birth, and that includes well over 3/4 of so-called pro-choice or pro-abortion rights Americans as well. So I think the Democratic candidates are listening to the echo chamber of the abortion industry, and they're not actually talking to real humans on the street, because America's becoming more pro-life because there's more sonogram and more imaging technology. And it turns out when you see what happens in utero, you start to say, wow, that baby looks a lot like a baby. Maybe I should rethink some of my positions.
Yeah, the blue bubble is thick indeed. Good luck getting through that. Coronavirus. China says 45,175 cases, 1,115 deaths, 4,774 recoveries. But what if it's a 10x error? Meaning, what if they're lying to us? Do you think they're lying to us, Senator Sasse?
Well, that's a evergreen comment. Secrecy, denial, and lying are not bugs in Chairman Xi's regime. They are features. They're the ways that he tries to hold his people down. So I don't know the facts. We don't know the facts about how many more people may already be infected, but I believe their number of 60 million in lockdown is probably a floor. And so this is obviously, far more dangerous than SARS, which 17-ish years ago was thought to be the kind of pandemic people had worried about for decades, and then ended up, though a lot of people suffered, it ended up not being quite as bad as it could have been. I think in this case, we have a situation where you could end up with a plague, and this happens because this is not just a natural catastrophe. This happens because the Communist Party is committed to holding power in ways that deny other people's humanity and dignity and just the reality of agency. When you had a doctor who was trying to raise red flags about this early on, and he was threatened and ultimately imprisoned and detained, he's now dead. But that happens because Chinese officials didn't want to act for more than a month, because if you warned other people that they were having this disease starting to ravage a geography, they thought that would harm Chinese honor, and they would rather be able to lie about it.
And when I see headlines like at CNN's Business right now, is the coronavirus peaking? Investors are hopeful. I'm reminded in 1918, 100 years ago, they thought it was over twice, and twice it came back in more virulent forms. I just think our guard isn't high enough, Senator Sasse. Last word to you.
I agree with you on that. I mean, I think we have to recognize that we've got a long-term 10 and 20 and 30-year problem with the Communist Party of China, and there are going to be so many things that flow out of their new surveillance state, techno-authoritarianism, and the ways that they oppress their people are horrible on their own score, but also because of the way it'll overflow beyond their borders.
Senator Ben Sasse, have a great time at the Nebraska breakfast. Tell them that Joe Orduña and Johnny Rogers are alive. They ought to get them back because, it's just one of those things. Otherwise, I think Northwestern's going to beat you like a drum. And that's really going to be humbling. Don't go anywhere, America. Hour number 3 of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Straight ahead.
Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns for break in 4 minutes and 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 45 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 1 minute and 15 seconds. Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 45 seconds.
most surprising here is that of all the voters I've talked to, and we're talking probably upwards of 100 right now, not a single one saying they support Joe Biden.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings to all 400 affiliates across the United States, including our brand new affiliate down in Pensacola, Florida. We are so happy to have WPNN FM 103.7, 790 AM, Pensacola's number one information and sports leader. Join us from the cradle of naval aviation on the morning after the New Hampshire primary. That was Miguel Marquez in CNN land up in New Hampshire. 100 people he talked to, not one supporting Joe Biden. He couldn't find the 9% that supported him. I am joined by America's walking, talking decision desk, Michael Barone. For years, the only guy I would talk to about anything. Now there's Kornacki who comes along. He's sort of like a mini Michael Barone. Michael, good morning. It's great to have you.
Well, it's good to be with you, Hugh, on historic week in American presidential primary politics.
Tell us what you make of last night's win by Bernie Sanders and the fact that what I call the narrative, which used to be called the hive, I just call it the narrative. The ABC's The Note says Biden's fade creates a vacuum in the front-runnerless race. My, how they hate Bernie Sanders, who's clearly the front-runner.
Well, I think Bernie Sanders is the front runner. He's got some dogged competition from former Mayor Pete and from Amy Klobuchar. I'm tempted to use first names with all these individuals. But I see here, Hugh, this looks like the same plot line the Republicans had in 2016. An interloper comes into the party, gets enthusiasm from odd quarters. The party establishment deems he's unelectable and uncontrollable, and as Hillary Clinton said of Bernie Sanders, nobody likes him. He doesn't have. He does well in the first two contests. Remember, Donald Trump lost Iowa to Ted Cruz narrowly. He won New Hampshire, but 65% of the voters there in Republican primary voted against him. And Bernie Sanders has done roughly comparable. They actually counted the number of people that showed up in Iowa. The Democrats, in addition to their state convention delegate equivalents, that has always been their metric. We still don't know if the count is accurate, but more folks showed up to vote for Bernie Sanders there than did for any other candidate, and he got that what appears to be a 26-24 to 20 victory over Bernie over Pete and Amy in New Hampshire. So, I think he's the front runner. And I think that you've got a situation where a lot of other candidates, including some no-chancers, are tempted to stay in the race. They're lobbing attacks at one another like that, I thought, homophobic video that, or appeal to homophobic feelings that Joe Biden ran on Pete Buttigieg. That looks like, Chris Christie attacking Marco Rubio in 2016, doesn't it?
It does. I've been very open. I'm a Virginia voter. I voted early because I have excused absentee. I voted for Bernie Sanders because it's my right to participate in whatever primary I want. And I want a clear choice between socialism and free markets on the ballot. I think Bernie's going to pick up a lot of Republican and independent voters. I think he did yesterday. What do you think about that question? It's not strategic voting, because if I wanted to put the weakest person up, I'd vote for Elizabeth Warren. But I do think a lot of Republicans would like to have this fight now in the clear, with a demarc line between Bernie from the left, I mean from the actual honest-to-God socialist, versus Donald Trump. I'd like that. What do you think will happen in the open primaries, Michael Barone?
Well, the open primaries, we hear talk of people in upcountry South Carolina, Republican voters going in to vote for Bernie. I think, crossover voting, such as you committed in Virginia this cycle, is unusual, but it's a possibility. And occasionally it gets fairly big. Michigan Republicans 2000 voted heavily for. Democrats came in and voted for John McCain over George W. Bush because they hated John Engler, the Republican governor who was backing Bush big. And so it's occasionally decisive. I think that Michigan example is the best single one. And, these Republicans are operating on the assumption that Bernie is beatable. I think that's a pretty good assumption. But you know what, Hugh? Maybe unlike you, I haven't been right about everything.
No, I've been wrong about everything. So I thought Kamala Harris would be ahead right now. I'm in California this morning, Michael Barone, and there are ballots everywhere being sent to my old address for everyone in my family. People haven't lived there for 6 years. We got a ballot harvesting issue in California. I wrote about it for the Washington Post yesterday. Voting's been underway for 2 weeks in California by mail. What do you think's going to happen in the Golden State, which has got a lot of delegates, and they're all going to be counted up on March 3rd, and the ballot's been underway for 2 weeks? What is the impact of this news cycle, ever-present news cycle and narrative on these people voting on the West Coast?
Well, you're going to have some limit on crossover voting because I gather registered Republicans in California, the few of them that are left, aren't going to be able to vote in the Democratic primary. Unless they get a ballot and somebody harvests it in that favor. We will see what happens. I mean, you've got the odd factor here of Michael Bloomberg with a fortune estimated at something like $56 billion. He's Scrooge McDuck diving into the money bin. Michael Bloomberg can spend $1 billion on TV in California if he wants to. He has resources of the sort that I think we've never seen in politics, with maybe the exception of Nelson Rockefeller's campaigns in New York, where he can spend, the Obama, Hillary Clinton campaigns, Donald Trump campaigns spent roughly $1 billion each. Michael Bloomberg could spend that between now and March 3rd.
And I think he will. I'm driving around California for 2 days. I was back in D.C. last week. I can't escape Bloomberg radio ads. If you're buying radio, you're way past TV. You're deep into markets. You're trying to segment. You're trying to pick up particular demographics. Let's pause for a moment. Having an on-air wake for Joe Biden, Michael Barone. You've followed his career for a long time. He's never been a very good presidential candidate. He's proving once again he's not a very good presidential candidate. He says it's not over. Is it over, Michael Barone?
It's over. I interviewed Joe Biden by telephone May 1972. He was a 29-year-old Newcastle County councilman in Delaware. He presented to me an outline and in explicit form how he was going to beat the well-respected incumbent Senator Caleb Boggs, who'd held statewide office for 26 years. He executed that very well in Delaware. He's got a style that has fared well in Delaware over the years. But as you say, he's never really had the mental discipline and stick-to-itiveness that you need to be a successful presidential candidate. His mind is, he's sort of a generous man. And I think he's also a victim of the Democratic Party's, in my view, irrational move to impeach Donald Trump. Who was the politician mentioned most often in that thing? Joe Biden, and whose son gets a $50,000 a month job working for a Ukrainian natural gas firm or whatever it was. Good grief, that stunk to high heaven. You had mainstream media saying, well, there's nothing wrong with what Hunter Biden did, but how do they know? And anyway, it stinks to high heaven, even if it's legal in Ukraine and legal in the United States and so forth and so on. The Democrats did Biden no favor.
Now, is Elizabeth Warren's campaign as dead as Joe Biden's?
Yeah. I mean, basically, I think her hope was upscale white college graduates, affluent in the Democratic Party. You look at the turnout. You look at the race in the two big towns in New Hampshire that Bernie Sanders failed to carry against Hillary Clinton in 2016, and in which he finished a poor third or fourth. Bedford, just outside Manchester, and Windham, right near the Massachusetts border. Those two affluent towns split between Buttigieg and Klobuchar. That was where the affluent vote was going. They looked over Elizabeth Warren, and after they heard her wobble and stumble about how she was going to pay for her Medicare for All plan, and it really wouldn't be Medicare for All exactly, and so forth, they decided that the I Have a Plan lady law professor really didn't have what it takes.
30 seconds, Michael. Do the Elizabeth Warren voters go to Bernie or do they go to Amy?
They wander around. College graduate whites are notoriously faithful in their marriages and unfaithful in their primary allegiance.
Michael Barone, always a pleasure. America's Decision Desk. Follow him on Twitter at Michael Barone. Follow me to the next segment, America. It is the Hugh Hewitt Show on the day after Bernie Sanders' big win in New Hampshire. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. New Hampshire's in the books. Bernie won. Bernie won big because he won. All right, it's only 1% or 2%, but he won. Bernie won. They're talking about Amy Klobuchar this morning. She didn't get 1 out of 5 votes. But the narrative, which is the combination of all the talking heads on the left, which is 85% of the people you see on TV. Honestly, is it that hard to find a conservative somewhere to come on and talk about this? I guess it is. Maybe it was this way when only Republicans were interesting 4 years ago, but they had a race. They screwed Bernie 4 years ago. They can't screw him this year. But it just is. It's over. It's done. Let's do a market report brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. Andrew Del Rey, Todd Avakian, been friends of mine for 20 plus years and a half dozen years, respectively. They are with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. They lend you money. They refinance your house and get money out of it if you need to consolidate debt or pay for college or add a room or a bedroom or fix it up or buy a rental or do whatever you need to do for retirement planning. Maybe just lower your monthly PITI. Interest rates are so low. Yesterday, the 10-year Treasury dropped down to 1.55%. This is not going to stick around. If you want to be a co-borrowing, non-occupying owner with your son or daughter, grandson or granddaughter, get them started on home ownership, you can do that. AndrewandTodd.com. We'll advise you how to do it, answer a couple of questions. I'll be right back to you. Overnight, coronavirus is shaking off. The market's shaking it off overnight internationally. Japan went up 0.75%. Hong Kong index almost 1% up. England up 1/3%. Germany up 0.84%. Will be another good day on the market in the United States, even though the Dow was off 0.5 point yesterday. The Nasdaq went up 10. The S&P went up 6 as it figured out coronavirus. And they're beginning to figure out the mortality is not that high. The morbidity is pretty high, but not the mortality. And hopefully it stays that way. But markets seem to be pretty steady, and that means take advantage. That means the 10-year is going to inch up, and when the 10-year inches up, your 15 and 30-year mortgages inch up, so don't wait any longer. AndrewandTodd.com. Don't wait any longer as well to see Created Equal Clarence Thomas in his own words. Conservatives everywhere need to go see this movie and show the flag for Clarence Thomas, who has held up the flag for the United States for all these years since he was put through the gauntlet. He was innocent then, he's innocent now, but he's become a great jurist in between. Magnificent dissents, pulling all of American legal theory back to its originalist roots, along with Justice Scalia, now aided by Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh and John Roberts. And it's a 5-person, Justice Alito, of course. It's a 5 serious originalists on the court now. Things are going to be great. Justice Thomas stood there lonely for many years. Go watch about him at the justicethomasmovie.com. Find out where Created Equal is playing at justicethomasmovie.com. Got to play for you a couple of clips. From last night because Joe Biden is just, we're going to lose him soon, right? He's going to just drop out pretty soon. So let's use him while we can. Here's Joe Biden in South Carolina saying what we all know not to be true. Cut number 21.
I want y'all to think of a number. 99.9%. That's the percentage of African American voters who have not yet had a chance to vote in America. One more number. 99.8. That's the percent of Latino voters who haven't had a chance to vote. So when you hear all these pundits and experts, cable TV talkers talked about the race, tell them it ain't over, man. We're just getting started.
Well, it is over. And in fact, Michael Barone just said it's over. But Joe Biden also cut 22.
You can't be the Democratic nominee. And you can't win a general election as Democrat unless you have overwhelming support from black and brown voters. It's just really simple. No, it's a natural fact. It's true. It's absolutely true. And folks, you know, all those Democrats who won against incumbents, from Jimmy Carter to a guy named Clinton, to a guy named Obama, my good friend, guess what? They had overwhelming African-American support.
But of course, Barack Obama didn't beat an incumbent. He beat John McCain, who wasn't an incumbent. But it's Joe Biden, so 1 out of 3 is not bad from the mistake ratio. Stay where you are, America. Coming right back with Ruth Marcus of the Washington Post. Here from the other side of the divide. Next on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined by Ruth Marcus, deputy editorial page editor of the Washington Post, author of the fantastic book Supreme Ambition, The Conservative Takeover, Brett Kavanaugh book, which I talked with her a lot about, but I'm here to talk with her today about New Hampshire and the collapse of Joe Biden. Good morning, Ruth. How are you?
Morning, Hugh. I'm fresh at home from a long stretch in New Hampshire, which was fascinating.
Well, I got to do that 4 years ago when the Republicans mattered. I am very glad to be in California this week, not there. What happened last night? What's your takeaway?
So my takeaway is a couple things. One is that we're paying too much attention to a few percentage points at the very top of the race and not enough attention to what we should all be talking about, and I predict are going to be talking about in the next stretch, which is the number of delegates. The way Democrats have set up their delegate rules, which is to choose by proportional representation, means that these tenths of percentage points that we were talking about in Iowa and a few percentage points that we're talking about here don't really make the difference because Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders had a very good night, and he did win the New Hampshire primary, so not trying to take anything away from him, but they walk out of the state with the same number of delegates. So what we have here is a very different race than we thought we were going to have a few weeks ago. It's a race that looks like sooner or later, and possibly soon enough, it will be without both Vice President Biden, who was once the front runner in the race, and without Massachusetts Governor Elizabeth Warren, who I thought was doing a really impressive job on the campaign trail in New Hampshire, and just had a remarkably poor showing for a senator from a neighboring state. And this Clobo charge is completely fascinating, and it's a actually fantastic illustration of the importance of both retail politics and debate politics, and I'm glad she has that she performed herself into third place.
Now, what's interesting is I began the hour with Michael Barone, who's not anywhere near you on the political spectrum, but he agrees with you that the Joe Biden campaign is over and the Liz Warren campaign is over. They may not know it, but it's over.
I think they might kind of know it.
Yeah,
in their hearts.
In their hearts, they do. I mean, they have to. And their numbers today, the fundraising is just going to crater. Amy Klobuchar had a pretty good night fundraising. So here's my theory, Ruth. Take a shot at it. The narrative, which is sort of the successor to what used to be called the Hive, the narrative is the combined arms of Manhattan, Beltway, Hollywood, and Silicon Valley media and Democratic Party activists. They hate Bernie. And the narrative is going to do whatever the narrative can do to stop Bernie. They don't think Buttigieg can stop Bernie. They think Amy can stop Bernie. So they're going to rally to Amy. And I mean, big time rally to Amy, not to Bloomberg because of the whole stop and frisk, but they're going to do everything they can to will her into serious contention. Before we decide whether or not that's possible, do you agree with me?
Well, not entirely, because I think I am about to do the trite thing and invoke Will Rogers on the Democratic Party and not belonging to an organized party.
Yep.
That sort of presumes a backroom capacity, that there is some place that I haven't found it yet, where the Democrats meet or where they're all in agreement on the best approach. And so, number one, I actually really don't think Democrats are organized enough or unified enough to do that. But number two, even if they were, we have this phenomenon out there of Michael Bloomberg with his billions of dollars that he is capable of putting into this thing and the hundreds of millions of dollars that he has already put into it. And that the people meeting in that mythical back room or kind of hive-minding themselves to the same result have a hard time figuring out how to compete if all of them wanted to with that Bloomberg force. So we're in uncharted territory there.
Now, Ruth, I'm in my fifth year of missionary work to the narrative, inside the Beltway, at MSNBC, talking to my friends inside the narrative, and they just don't like Bernie. Now, I don't know what the Bloomberg impact is, but can we at least agree that when former Secretary of State Clinton said nobody likes Bernie, she was speaking truth, not to power, but to just anyone who would listen. Nobody likes him except he's got every young kid in America on his side.
Well, there's two different layers to this. One is whether people personally like him, and he does have his Bernie-ish personality, which I think is the authenticity that the kids respond to, but might be the prickliness and dogmatism that people like me might not respond to as well. But then there is the question of whether people like me, who, just to be clear with your listeners, would like to not see President Trump reelected and would like to see someone else in the White House, but whether people like me, centrist, Democratic-leaning voters, I'm not a Democrat, I don't belong to any organized party, whether we agree with Bernie Sanders' policies, whether we think that they're achievable, and whether we think that even if they were achievable, that they would be wise for this country. And I think there are a lot of centrist Democrats, both the ones in the dark imaginary rooms and a lot of people out there. If you look at the numbers last night, you add up Amy, you add up Pete Buttigieg, you add up the small amount for Vice President Biden, and you get to a much more moderate place than where Bernie is. So it's not disliking Bernie that creates this response as much as on a personal level as really disagreeing with his policies, because I really do.
What's interesting is I am a Republican, and that's not going to surprise you or my audience, but I am allowed, and I have already voted in the Virginia primary, which is open, and I exercise my right to use the laws, which I wish would change to close all primaries, but they're not. And I voted for Bernie because I want a socialist versus a free market. If I'd been a strategic voter, I would have voted for Elizabeth Warren because I think she would have been the easiest to beat, but Bernie could be tough to beat. I voted him anyway because I want the clear choice in front of the American people. Barone tells me the clearest example of crossover voting mattered was in Michigan 2000 primary when anti-Engler Democrats crossed over into the Republican primary to vote against the Engler preference, which was George W. Bush, and voted for McCain. Do you expect there will be a lot of people like me who take advantage of the open primaries on Super Tuesday to vote for Bernie?
Well, I'm going to say something that you might not like, Hugh, which is I really hope not, because first of all, I think that most people are not as strategic there. Most people don't vote for the candidate that they agree with the most and think is most likely to win, not with the candidate they think is most likely to mess up the opposition. And I'm just going to get on my high horse here for a second and say that I think the vote is a really sacred trust, and I don't think we should be using it to mess up the other side. And I don't think America really needs or wants a choice between a socialist and Donald Trump, because most Americans, most Democrats are not avowed socialists. They are progressives and liberals, and they have a completely legitimate disagreement with you on policy issues, but trying to force them to that choice because you think it would be a sort of more fun debate and a debate that you think your side is more apt to win, I think it's just, I just think it's bad practice, Hugh.
I think it's a necessary catharsis. I believe that most of these Democrats are in fact, or quote, progressives, are in fact social Democrats of the Bernie sort, that they all support Medicare for all of some sort. They're all going very far to the left of the regulatory state, and that we've got to get it into the open and get the AOC element out there. You know, she's out there leading. Let me play for you what AOC said yesterday, Ruth Marcus, cut number 3 at a Bernie, New Hampshire rally. Listen to this.
We are at a crossroads in our democracy. We're at a key crossroads, and we cannot underestimate the power of hate. We cannot underestimate the power of that divisiveness and the centering and the vitriol and all of that. We cannot underestimate that. And that is why we need to nominate someone with a political revolution at their back.
So Ruth Marcus, she thinks I'm a hater. I like her. I think she's pretty smart and intelligent and charismatic, but she doesn't have a good plumb line on American politics. But I want her candidate front and center so that she can get a lesson at the ballot box.
Right. Well, you want to be running against Bernie and AOC because you correctly think that is the most clarifying choice for voters, and I think it's a terrible choice for voters. And the Democrats are going through a primary now, allowing some people who are not Democrats in some states to vote in their primaries, which I think is a good idea, despite mischief makers like yourself, in order to figure out just how far left the Democratic Party is. Is it as far left as you believe in the description just a few seconds ago, or is it where I'm arguing with you that it is, which is very different from where the Republican Party is, very different from where President Trump is, but also not anywhere near as left as Senator Sanders and AOC.
All right, last question, Ruth. You know what Kavanaugh's hearings did to the Republican base. Do you think impeachment helped President Trump in the final analysis?
Well, the final analysis is coming in November, right? I think that in the end, it's clear that the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings rallied the base, probably the Democratic incumbent senators who lost all but maybe one of them were going to lose anyway. I think that the impact of impeachment, political impact of impeachment, probably will have faded by the time we get to November, and also that there are, as always, cross effects, right? It rallies the base. I was standing outside the hockey arena in Manchester the other night when President Trump was speaking. That rallies his base, but failing or declining to pursue impeachment would have had a diminishing effect on the Democratic base. So I think net, whoever is elected president in November, it's not going to be as a result of impeachment.
And did you see the 51st Appeals Court judge get confirmed yesterday?
Congratulations to you.
Ruth is the only other person, along with Savil Kapoor, who cares about this. So I always talk with her about it.
I read the transcript. Thank you for sharing it of your, celebratory interview with the majority leader.
Leave no vacancy behind.
I am certain that he won't. Having left a lot behind when President Obama was president.
Ruth Marcus of the Washington Post. Follow her on Twitter at Ruth Marcus. Follow me to the next segment. James Hohmann of the Washington Post is back to close out the show as we continue to look at the demise of the Joe Biden campaign. Don't go anywhere, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show, except to ReliefFactor.com. That's right. I'm holding it in my hand. I'm reminding you as you go out the door, you're going to go commute. You folks in Seattle, it's 5:45. I know you start out now. You got to drive all the way down from wherever you are north of Seattle. You got to make that long commute if you're in Portland. If you're up in San Francisco, where I've got that amazing 1 out of 10 people in San Francisco listen to this radio show. That's because they're driving for 2.5 hours, and they got to have something interesting to listen to that will tell them the news. They got to find out right away that Bernie won and that Pete Buttigieg came in second and Joe is on the floor and Elizabeth Warren's there with him, and they're both knocked out. They don't know it yet. But they got a long commute, and that long commute is going to be hard on you, and the only way to deal with it is ReliefFactor.com. You can take those over the counters. They're not good for you to take them every day. I can't take them at all. All I can tell you is I carry in curcumin, resveratrol, omega, 4 natural supplements. They work. $19.95. Get you started. ReliefFactor.com. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. James Hohmann is the big Jim at the Washington Post. You can sign up for his Monday through Friday morning newsletter, the Daily 202, by going to WashingtonPost.com/newsletter. I just tweeted it out, and you can follow him on Twitter at James Hohmann. Hohmann's very difficult to spell for the Steelers fans, Hohmann. Good morning, James. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. I'm great. It's wonderful to be with you.
It's good to talk to you. Thank you for getting up early. You're hard to get out of bed. You're like Lindsey Graham. You two are the last guys to get out of bed in Washington, D.C., or you stay up too late, or what? I don't know what it is, but you're hard to get on the air. James, just talk to Ruth Marcus. Just talk to Michael Barone. They both say Joe Biden and Liz Warren are dead parrots. Do you agree?
Yes, I do. I think, they both still have the potential to be spoilers to some degree, Biden, especially in South Carolina. I think, he seems determined, at least for now, to fight it through. That could end up sort of changing the outcome. He could divvy up the more establishment-minded vote, helping Sanders accumulate delegates. Warren, if she can't win in New Hampshire, I don't know where she wins, Hugh. I mean, you look at New Hampshire has a long history of being pretty welcoming to liberal Democrats from Massachusetts, but not Warren. The altitude really came out from under her. I mean, talking to you from Concord, New Hampshire this morning, and I went to a middle school rally that she had here on Sunday, and more than a third of the crowd sort of filtered out while she was talking. This is a state where she was leading in the polls just a couple months ago. So she may have 1,100 staffers. She has more staff than any other candidate but Bloomberg, but that means that she has a high burn rate, and I don't know how she's going to raise money after last night, and I don't know how she's going to be able to sustain that beyond Super Tuesday. But I do think she might kind of fight it out, stick in the race through Super Tuesday, and hope to make something happen. Again, that works to Sanders' advantage. Helps him win more delegates, keeps everyone sort of divided.
Now, James, what used to be called the Hive was limited to the Beltway. I now call it the narrative. That's the Beltway, Manhattan, media elite, the Democratic activists in Silicon Valley and Hollywood. It's all combined together into the would-be managers and makers and breakers of reputation. It seems like the Hive is willing Amy Klobuchar into this race. She still only got 20% of the vote in New Hampshire. I don't think she's got the chops to overtake the race for Bloomberg's slot as the alternative to sure electoral defeat. What do you think?
So Klobuchar has not demonstrated an ability to make inroads with non-white voters, either blacks or Latinos. I think that's going to end up being a big problem for her the next couple of weeks. We spent months talking about how Pete Buttigieg didn't have any appeal with black voters. Klobuchar's even worse position. She hasn't received extensive media scrutiny because she hasn't been at the top of the pack. I think you'll start to see some of that. I do, in some ways, it's sort of reminiscent watching the people try to make Klobuchar happen of people who kind of were trying to will Marco Rubio into being the guy to beat Trump 4 years ago. And
yep.
That voters weren't willing to go there. And I see a lot of parallels between Rubio and Klobuchar.
That's very well stated. That's very apt. I talked to Michael Barone earlier. I've already voted in Virginia because I'm an excused absentee and I could go in and get my ballot. I voted in the Bernie side, and I voted for Bernie because I want the clarity of the choice between a socialist and a free market candidate. Ruth Marcus hates that, but Michael Barone tells me it happens occasionally. It's significant occasionally. He pointed to 2000 in Michigan when Engler-hating Democrats crossed over to vote for John McCain just despite Engler, whose guy was George W. Bush. I think it's going to happen a lot myself, but Ruth is skeptical. What do you think, James Hohmann?
I think it is going to happen a lot. I think it's going to happen in South Carolina, especially. Obviously it's an open primary. There are a lot of kind of conservative leaders in the Palmetto State who've already been sort of saying, let's vote for Bernie because there's not going to be a competitive primary, obviously, on the Republican side. And if Sanders wins in South Carolina, it's going to be really hard to say, this is a guy who won 3 or 4 of the first 4 contests in terms of the popular vote, and he's not going to be the nominee. You're going to have momentum on Super Tuesday. So I think there's definitely a strategic voting advantage in doing that. I mean, the risk is that Sanders is the Democratic nominee. For conservatives, the risk is that Sanders is the Democratic nominee and somehow ends up winning the election.
Well, yeah, but it's not really a risk because we need clarity in this country. And I explained to Ruth, I don't think he'd win that election, but if he did, the failure of socialism would be so manifest so quickly that we would revert to the norm very rapidly after Obama in 2009 and 10 lost the Congress. Bernie would get 2 years and then the country would be solidly red.
Yeah, no, I think that if Sanders did 1/100th of the things that he talks about, there would be just an extraordinary backlash. But one of the things I should say about Sanders is that he actually was weaker than I expected, and certainly he expected here in New Hampshire. There are a lot of warning signs for him, but his whole theory of the case for why Democrats should support him is that he's going to expand the electorate, that he's going to convince all these young people who feel disenchanted with politics, who've never voted before, that he's going to bring them into the process and get them engaged the way, frankly, President Trump really did do with a lot of blue-collar voters in places like Pennsylvania. And Iowa and New Hampshire show there's no evidence of that. Sanders has been totally unable to expand the electorate to bring new people in. These are traditional Democratic voters that are supporting him.
That's what you'll get if you subscribe to the Daily 202, James Hohmann's newsletter by the national political correspondent for the Washington Post, James Hohmann, every Monday through Friday. Sign up for it at WashingtonPost.com/newsletters. Follow James on Twitter at James Hohmann with 2 N's for you Steelers fans. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Generalissimo. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Jim. Thanks all of you out there, and I'll be back tomorrow on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.